Good evening and welcome to tonight's shiur, Parshas Thursday evening of Parshas Behaalosecho. Today's shiur is dedicated to the yortzeit of Rav Nachman Sudak, Olav Shalom, whose yortzeit is tonight and tomorrow, and his mechutin, Reb Binyamin Klein, who's the Rebbe's Gabe, whose yortzeit is the following day on Shabbos in Yud Ches Sivan. Then Shometz have an aliyah and be a Melitza Yosef for their families and all of us. So first, a simple question, and that is, when it comes to in the morning, sometimes you don't have 10 people at the time for Shacharis. So for Hodu, Hodu starts because you want to have your minyan consistent, but you don't have 10 people. And then the 10th man arrives a little bit later. That can be on Shabbos also. It's funny, I was a couple of years ago, I was in a shul at Crown Heights, and the Kaddish chiyuv came in late. He came in just about by Haderes v'Emunah, and he wanted to say Kaddish. Okay, so he said Kaddish, but then someone was very upset. What's this? Okay, you come late and you want to say Kaddish? A couple of days later, I was in the Beis Chabad for the last days of Yom Tov, and they didn't get a minyan for the beginning of Davening, and each day it was the 10th man arrived just in time before Baruch Shoma, so they had Kaddish then. So it depends who's doing whom a favor. At any rate, so if someone comes late, and now we have a minyan, do we have to say Reb Yishmoel again? So before going into the detail, a very simple point is that Kaddish doesn't come in isolation. Kaddish is a follow-on always from something else, either from a learning or from davening. Kaddish is always a follow-on. So we have here a case of Ashrei. There's a machlokes now in a bit more detail. If you had 9 people or less even, and you said Ashrei, then the 10th person arrives, do you have to do Ashrei again? So the Taz in Siman Nun Hey says you do not need to, whereas the Mogen Avraham in 2 places in Siman Resh Lamed Daled and Samach Tes, he says you have to. You didn't have a minyan for your pre-Kaddish session, therefore you have to do that again. So let's take a look here. This is in Ksos HaShulchan in 2 places. One is in Siman in Bat Ashrei by Mincha. Im Omru Ashrei, if you said the Tzibur said Ashrei and they didn't have 10 people, V'chakar bo haminyan, and then the 10th person arrives. Yarzu hashat eze psukim b'kel rom koidim shema kaddish. So at least the chazan has to say a couple of psukim before saying kaddish. In other words, you don't have a kaddish totally dry without anything before it. In the footnotes, he refers us to where he discusses it more in detail in Siman Tes Zayin, where he says, "B'chol limud she'ema achrav kaddish," where there's a learning followed by a kaddish, there needs to be 10 people v'shas halimud when the learning is done. And if there weren't 10 at the limud, then one would have to repeat either a chapter of Tilim or at least 3 psukim once there's a minyan there, or a agoda like Rabbi Chanan ben Akasha, etc., and that should be said in the presence of 10. So it's the same thing. And in the notes, what he calls his notes, Badei HaShulchan, so he refers to the Mogen Avraham, and he says, although the Taz disagrees, and the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, this question is not addressed, but it remains that should be the psak. So just to summarize that, if there's he started Hodu without Kaddish because there was no 10th person, and the 10th person arrives some middle of Hodu before Baruch Shoma. Now someone wants to say Kaddish, that's okay, but someone has to say I guess the end, at least the end of Reb Yishmoel, that braysa, there should be a limud, and then one could then the Kaddish can be said. We're going to the next point. So one of our regulars asked me, it comes to Tikun Leil Shovuos. He's actually lives in Eretz Yisrael. He has more time to do tikkun than we have over here. Here, by the time you finish the Suda, it's almost Salas HaShachar, but fine. In Tikun Leil Shovuos, there are, towards the end, there's a page or two from the Sefer Yetzirah. There's a couple of pages from the Zohar. And Hashem's name comes up there within quotes of Sukkim, etc. And so generally when we learn, and there's a pasuk comes up with Hashem's name, we would not utter Hashem's name in the process of learning. Here it's Tikun Leil Shovuos. What is it? Is it Davening? Is it learning? It's asking, do you say Hashem's name? So now on the screen you have a quote from Sefer HaMinhagim, which says that at Kagavno, everyone knows Kagavno, we say Friday night. Kagavno is said before Baruch Hu. It is a piece, it's a quote from the Zohar. The two paragraphs, it's a bit condensed, but it's a quote from the Zohar. There is a rumor that the Baal Shem Tov was once traveling and he was in a place and there was no minyan, and so he quoted this piece of Zohar which explains the Baruch Hu, and that was how it became the minhag to say Kagavno before Baruch Hu. Be that as it may, in Kagavno there is Hashem's name. Do ihu rozo da Hashem echad or Shemoy echad. This is the secret of Hashem echad or Shemoy echad, which I think is a pasuk in Zechariah. Hashem echad or Shemoy echad. And this is the secret of those words, Hashem echad or Shemoy echad. So do you pronounce Hashem's name as we would in davening, or is it Hashem? So here's a note of the Rebbe in the Sefer HaMinhagim. Kimeduma borur. It is my strong impression that we say Hashem ketikunai. As we say in Kagavno, we'll say Hashem's name as we would in davening. And so Rabbi Groner or Rabbi Greenglass, in their footnotes, they write that this comment about Kagavno is from a note of our Rebbe. And he writes further. This looks like it's the Rebbe's language. That when you have Hashem's name in a topic which you're learning, that's different to when one is learning how to say brachas, where the Alter Rebbe in Siman Reish Tes Vov says you're not allowed to pronounce Hashem's name. So Reish Tes Vov talks about when you're teaching someone to say a bracha, how to say a bracha. So when it comes to children, the Melamed and the children can say the brachas with Hashem's name, and that's part of their chinuch, and therefore you can say it's not considered Hashem's name in vain. When you're teaching an adult to say a bracha, so you shouldn't say Hashem's name unless there's an exception whilst he's actually doing the bracha. This is written in Hilchos Pesach. If you're coming to a house, there's a whole simon, I think, of Peidal. You're coming to a house and helping them to do the Seder, so you can say the brachas with them, with Hashem's name. So if you're helping the person put on tefillin, you can say Hashem's name whilst you're putting on the tefillin with him. That's based upon Tov Peidal. But if you're just teaching a person the bracha on tefillin, so you can't say Hashem's name. So the Rebbe is saying that there's a difference between saying a bracha in full whilst you're teaching someone, or Hashem's name which comes up in learning. And when obviously the Rebbe is saying that when Hashem's name comes up in learning, it's more lenient. In other words, that you can pronounce Hashem's name. Now, to contrast this, there is a shmua, Shem Reb Leibel Groner. Rabbi Groner would say that the Rebbe told him that in Pirkei Avos there's several times psukim with Hashem's name, and that you should, if it's not a full pasuk, only half pasuk, not to utter Hashem's name. This is Torah Shabbal Peh. But meanwhile, let's come back and see what we have over here. At the end of this note of the Rebbe, he says, "Re'ei Birkei Yosef Shom." Check out the Birkei Yosef from the Chidah in Siman Reish Tesvav. Ve'ein kan mekoimoi. I don't want to go into more detail over here, but you can look it up over there. So here you have on the screen quotes from the Birkei Yosef. Birkei Yosef Chidah, I believe, was a contemporary of the Alter Rebbe. Might be a bit earlier, a little later, I'm not sure. Didn't check. Din Gimel. It says you're allowed to teach children the brachas, Tiknon, with Hashem's name properly. Avol Godel, but an adult, B'shor Shaloi made, Oy Mebli Shem. Misprint there. That when an adult is learning the brachas, so then you should teach him without saying Hashem's name, and you trust that he will get it right when he's actually davening, or saying that, doing the mitzvah. Kein Kosav Rav Morgan Avro, and the Alter Rebbe follows the same. V'im yesh haskora be'emtza matbeya bracha haksuva b'shas. If you have Hashem's name which comes up in a bracha, you learn in Gemara brachas, and it says Baruch Atah Hashem Yotzei Hamayros. You learn in Gemara Yevamos Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Litate Asher Kishom Esvesa V'Tzon L'Das Ata V'Tzitzis. So Reb Yaakov Emden, the Yavitz, Reb Yaakov ben Tzvi, he says you are allowed to say Hashem's name when you're reading a bracha in the Gemara. Ve'ein dvarov muchrachim. And the Chidah says not his argument, his words are not very convincing. Minhag Rabbanon keshishoi be'eretz hatzvi, the veteran Rabbonim in Eretz Yisrael, their custom was sheloi lahaska Hashem b'kriyasei, kikriyasei. They wouldn't, when they were come along in a bracha in the Gemara, etc., they would not utter Hashem's name in the normal way. We follow on in the Birkei Yosef, and he says that when you're learning Gemara, Shas, Sha'ar Diri Razal, and there's Psukim, Koire Kedarkoi Hoaskorois Kikri Oson. So when you're learning a Gemara, and there's a Pasuk, and the Pasuk has got Hashem's name, so you are allowed to pronounce the Hashem's name in the Pasuk. This time it's also from Reb Yaakov Emden, but this is in the name of his father, and here the Birkei Yosef accepts this. So this is what the Rebbe is distinguishing in this note over here, that there's a bracha in the middle of learning, you don't say Hashem's name. But if a pasuk which has Hashem's name in the middle of learning, then you can say Hashem's name. And therefore, to say Hashem's name in Kagavno, that's the Rebbe's kind of supporting his position. You're saying Kagavno, it's Taka Limud, but you can say Hashem's name. But then I'm left with a contradiction. If so, why by Pirkei Avos do we have this information from Rabbi Groner, from the Rebbe, not to say Hashem's name when you have a half pasuk in Pirkei Avos? So I'm just going to suggest my svara, and you can take it or leave it. And is the following: that when you say Pirkei Avos, it's a little bit more relaxed, and it's probably conceivable that if someone would ask you something mundane, you'd interrupt the middle of your Mishnah and you'd answer them. You might be in the middle of that pasuk. It's people are not so careful, not so focused, and therefore is a minhag. The advice is not to say Hashem's name when you're saying Pirkei Avos. I think the learning of Kagavno is learning, but it's much more focused. And it's unlikely that someone will interrupt you and you will interrupt in the middle of Kagavno. And therefore, because it's more focused, you do say Hashem's name whilst you're saying it. And therefore, to come back to the question, person has stayed up a whole night, as he said, the whole of Tikun Leil Shovuos is now off for the Zohar, and the Sefer Yetzirah. I think it's pretty focused. And it's almost he wants to finish. He doesn't have time for Dvarim B'Teilim now. He wants to finish and go to mikveh, etc. So I think it's okay to say Hashem's name. As you see, in principle, what's written here is B'Shas HaLimud. You can say Hashem's name. I just want to add also, even in Pirkei Avos, despite this Shmuel B'Shem Rabbi Groner, But you have also in Pirkei Avos, Yirotzim Fonecha Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokeinu sheibanu beis hamikdash meheir v'yameinu. I feel that's a tefillah, even though it's within Pirkei Avos, it's a tefillah, and I don't see the need to hesitate about saying Hashem's name in the context of tefillah. Let's go on to the next point here. So here's a question. I see there's a chat. I'm going to go to that in a second. There. Someone put something on the chat. The question I was put was someone somewhere in Europe, wherever he parks his car, has to pay a fee daily. And it looks like you can't pay in advance. You have to pay b'yom. And it was actually before Shavuos or after Shavuos. He was asking, can he ask a goy to do his parking payment, and he'll pay him before or pay him after? Is he allowed to ask a goy to do this for him, to pay his parking fee? So at first I didn't know how to deal with it, and then I thought about it further, and I realized that if you don't pay your parking fee, so then you're going to get a penalty, and it's a substantial amount. Even if it wasn't, it would also, who wants to give extra money for the parking authorities? But so it's a significant amount of money, and so now we have a rule of Shavuos deShavuos, asking a goy to do this deRabonon. So more common, we say Shavuos deShavuos or tzorech mitzvah. But you also see here in the Siman Shin Zayin, who hadin b'mokim hefsid, where there's a loss involved. It doesn't say hefsid merubah, hefsid. So lo gozru al Shavuos, then to ask a goy to do this deRabonon is permitted. Kagoyin latalta, to ask a goy to move muksa stuff, which is otherwise in the rain, it'll get ruined. So you ask God to move the muksa. So moving muksa is deRabonon, asking a goy is deRabonon. Shavuos deShavuos is permitted, according to this opinion, tzorech hefsid, to avoid a loss. Yesh l'smech al divreim b'mokim hefsid gadol. Whether it's a significant loss or a significant need, so then there's room to be mekel. So therefore, I told him on that basis, he could ask a goy to do the parking payments for him. I didn't see any difference whether he pays the goy before Shabbos or after Shabbos. I didn't see any difference. The goy is doing an act for him. It's a deRabonon. Okay, let's move on to the next question. That was question number 3. We went to question number 4. So here a shliach serves a campus somewhere in Europe, and so it looks like sometimes these students do enjoy a cup mashke at the Chabad house. And okay, Baruch Hashem. So then one student said before Pesach, Rabbi, before I go home, I'm going to bring you a bottle of whiskey, vodka, whatever maybe. So the rabbi says, don't forget to sell your Chometz. But he didn't show up to sell his Chometz. And now, just around Shavuos time, he finished the semester. He's going back home, and he kept his word, and he comes with a bottle of mashke. And the rabbi on the shliach on campus is worried. Perhaps this is the same mashke which he was speaking about before Yom Tov. I don't know why he was being so anxious. Why shouldn't there be another bottle? But he's asking, and if it's from before Pesach, then he has to throw it down the drain. All right, so this we have here in Shulchan Aruch. Sofik Chometz she'oval Pesach. So Chometz during Pesach is a deRaisa to have it, bal yirah, bal yimotze. The Chometz which was in your possession over Pesach was a violation, but the consequence that it's forbidden to benefit from even after Pesach, Chometz she'oval Pesach, that is a knas deRabonon. It's isur deRabonon. So therefore, it would have made sense to use the principle of Sofik deRabonon lahokel. We don't know whether this bottle was from over Pesach or not, and therefore Sofik deRabonon lahokel. But yesh machmir, this is what it says over here. Therefore, it's Sofik divrei from lahokel. But yesh machmirim, there are those who are stricter, Sofek Chometz Shalom Pesach leosri ba'achilo, not to eat it. V'yesh lochush l'divreihem, if there's no hefsed merubah, don't eat it yourself. Aval b'hanoah mutar l'divrei hakel. This is everyone would agree that you're allowed to have hanoah. So I said, don't throw it down the drain. It's being val tashchis. If you wanted to enjoy it yourself, min hadin you'd be allowed to, chumr not to, but you can certainly give it away as a gift to someone, to as you say, or to sell it if you wanted to. That would be okay. So that's the. I think I've told the story before. My father, Oliver Shaw, was a moil, and he once went to an army base, an American army base, did a bris there. It was 2 days after Pesach, and the father of the baby gave my father a liter bottle of Smirnoff, and my father was concerned that it was owned by the Yid, but during over Pesach, that bottle stayed in storage in our cellar for about 6 years or something. But one day, I didn't ask anyone. I just poured it down the drain. But now I know that I shouldn't have done that. Okay, because the Sophical of Pesach was mutter bahanoah. Okay, so I hope my father is mochel me for having done that. Hanoah sticker behavior. Okay, let's move on. Question number 5. So this is interesting. I got a telephone call from someone in Muncie, and they hear the shiurim regularly, the recording, and he's asking that they had last Motzei Shabbos, the Chazan forgot that he has to just say half Kaddish. He said the full Kaddish with Kaddish to Skabel, and then V'hinoyam. So no one reminded him until afterwards, and now he's say V'hinoyam or not a Kaddish. And then the question is, what do you do now? Do you say a Kaddish, half a Kaddish, Kaddish to Skabel? So I told him that, like we do on the night of Tisha B'Av, on the night of Purim, we say Kaddish to Skabel after Davening. I might be mixing up something here. And then, well, let's say Purim night, it's a Kaddish to Skabel, and then we read the Megillah, and then there's a Kaddish to Hey Shlomo. So it's Kaddish without to Skabel. So the same thing here, you'll say Yinoyam and Vata Kaddish, and after that you say a Kaddish, Hey Shlomo Rabo, and Oisa Shalom B'Mreimov, etc. In the Sefer Shkiyas B'Yovin, I looked up it later, and he says the same thing. He says, according to Mishnah Berurah, according to the El Yerabah, maybe you could say Kaddish to Skabel again, but most others just say Kaddish Shalom without to Skabel. We're going on to the next point, and that is, I was during this past week, I was in Sweden, and I met the Shliach in Iceland, of Rov Feldman, and we were chatting about the challenges of the times being now. It doesn't get, there's no Tzeisak Echovim at this time of the year. And so he asked me the following. They for every night, the earliest you can daven Maya is from Plaga Mincha. Plaga Mincha is an hour and a quarter before sunset. So they do have a sunset, but they don't have a Tzeisak Echovim. So if the day is, let's say, a 22-hour day, so then Plaga Mincha is going to be about a bit more than 2 hours. It works out they daven Ma'ariv, the earliest they can daven Ma'ariv for Plaga Mincha is about 11 o'clock. So on Shabbos afternoon also, Shabbos evening, also they daven Ma'ariv at 11 o'clock, but they don't make Havdalah till Sunday morning. So now he's asking, I've already davened Ma'ariv at 11 o'clock. It's now 12 o'clock. I'm chalashim for a cup of coffee. I haven't made Havdalah yet. Am I allowed to make have a drink before Havdalah? It's not time for Havdalah. So this was his question. So truthfully, though, it's not such a problem. Let's take a look here. What we have in Siman Reish Tzadik Gimel says the following: a person who's onus, if you are in a predicament that you would not be able to do Havdalah at night because you're going to be traveling or something like that, and on Shabbos you're going till the end of the Tchum, and then you're going to push on right after nightfall, and so you won't have a chance to daven Ma'ariv and have to have Havdalah later. Yochel lispal arvis, you can daven Ma'ariv and to do Havdalah with a cup of wine from Plag HaMincha onwards. So really, just like he's davening Ma'ariv at 11 o'clock, he could also do Havdalah al Hakois at 11 o'clock. V'lo yevorech al hanei mibeit yaim, but no bracha on the flame. He doesn't address about the midah somim, but he can make Havdalah before the end of Shabbos. In other words, Havdalah is to celebrate that Shabbos is leaving. But that celebration can be also done before the end of Shabbos. That's the Ikar Hadid. And then we have a Sif Gimel which says, Yesh Oimrim, although Chachamim allow this, but Tovla is oddly, it's commended not to do so. It's something which people will find surprising. So generally it's not advised, but in their circumstances, they think it's people understand that this is an exceptional circumstance. And so they're making they could make Havdalah also, like they're doing from Plag HaMincha, they could do Havdalah from Plag HaMincha. And Isur B'Locha remains. He says now he just Havdalah every Sunday after Shacharis. But if he's desperate, he can make Havdalah and have his coffee. And then in the morning, if there are other people who haven't heard Havdalah, if there are other men, so then he can make Havdalah again for them. I just want to add this also, because of this, but if there's a person who lost a relative and he's an oinan, also on Shabbos, the aninus is suspended. But as soon as Shabbos is over, so he's an oinan, so he can't daven Ma'ariv. So the advice given is he should daven Ma'ariv and to have Havdalah early, again, the same thing, from Plag HaMincha. So it's not an oinan yet, it's still Shabbos. So he can daven Ma'ariv and say and Havdalah early. In this way, he's doesn't. I don't know whether that helps for Krishma, but at least for what he can do, he's advised to daven Ma'ariv from Plag HaMincha. I'm saying it now, it shouldn't be relevant, but when it becomes relevant, there's no one to talk to you often. So let's move on. So here, ein German approached me, and he says he's currently between jobs, as they say, and he's looking into a job as a salesman. To be as a salesman, it would mean that's whatever he's selling products, he'd go to various institutions. Let's say he's a salesman of paper goods. So he'll go to various yeshivas or schools and etc. This is in America. And he'll offer them, typically he'll offer them a better deal than what they're getting from the current supplier. So he asked me whether that is a permitted activity, because typically he'll be undercutting their current suppliers. So here we have in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, the Dinei Mominus, whatever he calls it, B'Ktsara. So in the section of Dinei Hefker v'Hasogas Gevul. I'm not sure why he put Hefker and Hasogas Gevul into the same section. I can ask various inyonim why those chapters were two topics into one chapter, three topics into one chapter. What's the affinity? All right. Meanwhile, he writes here, if a Jew has got a Goyish contact and he trades with him, whether he trades with him or he lends him money at interest, Yesh Oimrim, that another Jew is allowed to engage with that Goy and to offer them a better deal, because Nichsig Nochri and Hefker. Whereas Yesh Oistrin, others say no, that's not allowed, because it's this other Yid has got an ongoing contact with this guy, and therefore it's as if it's already the business is in the other Jew's hands, and so you're cutting off the lifeline, the parnosa of the other Yid by poaching his clients. So the dilemma is only with a Goyish contact. If there's a Jewish contact, it seems to be clear that you wouldn't be allowed to lure clients away. There's a term used in Chesed Mishpat. They use the word ma'arufya, which is, I think, is an Arab word. Arabic word, which means knowledge or it means in this context means a contact. So to lure someone else's contact away from them and to yourself is definitely not okay. Then we have, what about offering incentives? So here we have later, it says that it's mutter for a shopkeeper to offer freebies. He's going to give out popcorn, he's going to give out nuts to kids, and the kids or the maids who come doing the shopping, and it's because they're going to get freebies over here, they're going to be come to your shop rather than go to the other shops. You're luring clients away from others. So the answer is, I'm giving out egoism. You can give out, I'm giving out walnuts, you can give out almonds. I'm offering incentives, you can also offer incentives. You can do the same game. You're also allowed to lower the price or to give a larger amount. You get a 20% extra. Because you know what? You can also, I'm not taking away your parnasa. You can also, well, it's interesting because of course you are affected their parnasa. But he said you can also, I'm not totally cutting off your clients. You can keep your client by offering them the same thing. So there's a difference between directly poaching a client, it seems to be usher, whereas offering incentives to lure clients away from your competition, offering incentives seems to be okay. And then we finish off on Midas Chasidus. Midas Chasidus is that you should not be in any way intruding on someone else's business and someone else's parnasa. And it says a pasuk v'ish eshes re'ehu lo timei. He did not defile the wife of his fellow. Or Pirshu Chachomim, this is alluding to, it's a pasuk in Navi. Or Pirshu Chachomim zeh sherei leyorad letech umnus chavere. Someone who did not, this is a blessing for one who did not encroach upon someone else's craft, someone else's parnasa. So that's why I told this in Yaman that you're asking me, so look for something which is not encroaching on someone else's parnasa, that's more glad, midas chasidus. Of course, it's difficult, a person's between jobs, but he's asking me the question. I have to tell him what's written in Shulchan Aruch. Let's move on. And here is I got a question about a parent who made a commitment to pay X amount of money at school and then is not paying. So now usually I like to answer people's questions for themselves. Here it was one of the trustees asking about the people who default on their agreements. Are they defined as ganovim? The child continues using the services of the school, and then the school has a duty to pay salaries, etc. So here's the question: if a person doesn't honor his commitment, is he considered a ganav? It's not. I looked around to see. A question would really be, when it comes to crunch, would be, is he kosher le'edus? How's the hasna? You're looking around and you're looking who's going to be able to sign a ksubah, a kedushin. If there's someone you know, otherwise he's davening 3 times a day and chitas rambam fine sachen, but you know that he's defaulting on his agreed payments for tuition. Is he a kosher le'edus? I think that would be a crunch. I don't know what the person would be bothered by that, but that's where it would be enough kamina. So even that I didn't find clearly. But look at what you have on the screen. There's a din of paying a worker on time. Kosav Rambam, she'ein loikin olov, that a person who violates this and doesn't pay his worker on time, he doesn't get malchus. Because there's a lav hanitan l'tashlumin, a violation which can be repaired by paying up. So then that is not punishable with malchus. The Minchas Chinuch questions this. He says he can pay tomorrow. He can pay the missed salary, but he won't be able to fulfill, he won't be able to repair the inyan of paying on time. The violation is the delay. And so if he pays tomorrow, he hasn't repaired the delay factor. And so the Minchas Chinuch gives a different reason to the Rambam, and he says it's a lav she'ein b'maisa. It's the non-payment was a violation through in a passive way. And you don't get malchus for a passive violation. So then he gives a shiur how it could be if you took it away from you had designated an article for payment and you took it away, then that would be actively depriving the worker of being paid on time, and it would be possibly subject to malchus. Meanwhile, what we're seeing here is that by not paying a worker a chiyuv to pay, you don't pay, so then there is a question of malchus. There's no malchus, but generally, if there's something which is a aloud deRabonon, so a person who is in violation of a aloud deRabonon would be defined as a rosha and would not be kosher le'edus. So the parent made a commitment so that this to pay for the provision of workers, namely teachers, etc. And by not paying on time, I think there would be a serious concern of their kashrus le'edus. You can't say if you come back, you can negotiate another agreement, but let's move on. Last week, or was it 2 weeks ago actually? 2 weeks ago, we had the discussion about besomim, and it came up about adding that Alter Rebbe brings adding moir into the besomim because Ashkenazim will always say boire mine besomim for Havdalah, even if they're using a herb or if they're using a fruit, whatever it may be, we always say boire mine besomim to avoid the discomfort with this. So the recommendation is to put moir either with the other types, and moir is from an animal, and therefore the broch would be it's not a wood, it's not a fruit, it's boire mine besomim. Like meat is but shahakal nivdevoris, a moir from the blood of an animal would be boire mine besomim. Shavuos is slightly, I discussed the difference between the Alter Rebbe and the Mishnah Berurah. But meanwhile, in passing, I mentioned that moir, I mentioned the English word mir, M-Y-R-R-H. So someone, one of our listeners, corrected me, and that the word mir is actually a vegetable origin, and it's not so when we say moir is the blood of a chaya, the musk, that is indeed from an animal, but the mir is a fragrance from a vegetable origin. All right, so let's clarify that. So here we have in Rambam, this is the beginning of Hilchos Klei HaMikdash, and the Rambam says, Hamoir hu hadam hatzorur b'chaya shebehodu. It's the blood of an animal in India, and it's used for perfume. This is talking about the ingredients of the Shem HaMishcha, or whatever it may be. On this, the Ravid comments, Amar Avraham, Ein daiti mikabeles. I cannot accept this. Sheyikonsu b'maaseh hamikdash hakodesh dam shum chaya ba'olam. To bring blood as part of the avodah, certainly as a blood of a chaya tmeo. I find it unacceptable that should be part of the ingredient of the avodah. But the moir is, as it says in Shir Hashirim, Bosi legania choisikalo, orisi moiri in bismi, means I've gathered the moir with the psomim. Who mimin esef. I mean ilon, it's actually from vegetable or from a tree. A rechainator has a fragrance. So we have a machlokas, the Rambam and the Ravid, where the moir is the musk, or moir is this mir, or in other words, a fragrant vegetable. The Ravid disagrees with the Rambam, and also the Ramban al HaTorah. So here we have in the bottom of the screen from the Ramban in Parshas Kisiso, and he brings the Mor Derech HaMesh Meyos, The Moir, it's Moir, more, same thing. So Rabbi Moshe, as referring to the Rambam, says that it refers to the musk. And Reb Avraham, the Ravid, objects to this. And he says, no, and then he says, the Ravid asks the question from the Pasuk in Shir Hashirim, Orisi Moiri, which means it's something which is gathered in, which implies it grows in the fields. Those who say, and here you're saying it's from a kind of deer, etc. He says it's possible that this is a blood which is accumulated in this animal, which is a kind of deer in India. When it goes amongst the brambles in the hot weather, it has scrapes. Its feet are scraped, and it bleeds a bit, and that blood gets stuck to the brambles, and then people go and gather it. Therefore, Risi Moiri, they went around gathering the musk from the brambles. That's how the Ramban suggests a way to explain Orisi Moiri. But then he disagrees and he says that the Moir, as the Ravid says, it's a vegetable origin. So we have here two opinions what the Moir is. And then we have here also it's brought in the Alter Rebbe brings in the Torah in Torah a couple of times. This is from a Maimer, Purim Dika Maimer about Mordechai and Mordechai, or Morzel Das Rambam Sh'ar Mefarshim. Besides the Ravid and the Ramban, is the musk, which is mentioned in the Gemara in Pesach Mevorchim. It's a blood of a Chaya Yadua, which is in its hump. It's a hump on its neck, and that is the Meir. So we have here, all right, so it looks like the Tilas Hashem Siddur, that's where I got the mirror from. So that's following the Pesach of the Ravid and the Ramban, and to say that Meir is from an animal, that's the other opinion of the Rambam and many others. Meanwhile, this fellow who alerted me to this asked me, what indeed is the bracha for the mir, the one which is a vegetable origin? So here we have, this is from the Alter Rebbe's Seder Birchas Hanen, Perek Aleph. If you have oil and you mixed spices into the oil, and now the oil became a fragrant oil. So again, the oil is a bland oil, and you mixed into it various herbs, etc. And now the oil has become fragrant. So then you'd make if there's a mamoshes, if the actual wood or petals, whatever, is still in the oil, then you'd make the bracha on the oil, the appropriate bracha, if it's a wood or a herb, atzi b'samim or izbe b'samim. If, however, you strained the oil, and now it's just a pure oil, which has got a fragrance, but it doesn't have any bits there, so then some say you should say beir mineh v'samim, because now it's just a fluid without any, not atzibah, not eitzibah, not izbe. That is when you'd taken a bland oil and made it fragrant by putting the ingredients in. By contrast, mayim hanischotim mehabaysa, if you squeezed out liquid from you took this fragrant stuff and you squeezed it, and that fluid is fragrant. That's the same as the mamoshes of the boisim of the original thing, and therefore you make the appropriate bracha. Like a sap, a fragrant sap which comes from frankincense, etc. You'd say beire atzi b'samim. So with this mir, I'm not so familiar what the Matthias is, but whether it's atzi b'samim or is it isbe b'samim, it's onyx root. I saw onycha, whatever it is. I still didn't spend time enough to be mevarer, but it follows that once you know what the actual root is, then you make the same bracha on the oil which is squeezed out of it. So that's our list of questions for today, and what we have is now to make a siyum on the Sefer Harambam, Sefer Kedusha, we're just finishing today. And so the last thing is about Kisui Hadam. So Hashgacha Pratis, today we learned in Gemara, we started Gemara Beya, and there talks about in the first Mishnah, the third example, the third Machlokes Rashi Shammai Hillel is about Kisei Hadam. And I mentioned then something about the mitzvah of Kisei Hadam. So I'll first read the Chinuch, who talks about the mitzvah of Kisei Hadam, and then the last thing we'll finish off with actually reading the Rambam. So the Chinuch, as his style is, he's tracing the reasons for each mitzvah. Shorshe ha-mitzvah. What's the reason for this mitzvah of covering the blood after shechting a bird or shechting a chaya? It does not apply to shechting a cow or a sheep or a goat. To the domestic animals, it does not apply, only to chaya v'oif. So the life of every living creature is very much dependent on the blood, the circulation of the blood. Indeed, it says in the Torah, when it comes to Isadam, ki hadomu ha-nefesh. So the blood has got to do with the chayas. Therefore, we've taken now a chicken and we've shechted it. Roy lono, it would be appropriate for us to, out of respect, to cover that nefesh. To be discreet about that blood, to cover it before we go and start eating the meat. He seems to be saying that if you would be permitted to eat the meat whilst the blood is still splattered on the ground, that would be a certain cruelness to have the nefesh is so exposed, and you're going to eat the meat. The life force is splattered on the ground, and you're enjoying the meat. That's fairly much quite like an animal, like an animal of prey. So that's why we have a mitzvah to cover the blood. What about the blood of a cow and a sheep? We don't have this mitzvah when it comes to the blood of the domestic animals. And the answer for that is because dam ha-behemo niton lekorban lekapor al nafsheseinu. Because the blood of an animal is used for the choice, it'd be used as a korban, as a form of atonement. And therefore, in that sense, in that setting, when it's used as a korban and it's sprinkled on the mizbeach, on the contrary, that blood is used for atonement. And therefore, it's not covered. Since the blood in atonement is exposed, the Torah doesn't want to differentiate between kedoshim and chulin. Are you going to ask that amongst birds also? There are birds which are used as korbanos, the Torah and Ben Yoina, but they are a minority, and therefore the Torah doesn't take such consideration for a minority. So that's what he's saying. It's got to do with so Kisei Hadam is saying actually it's got to do with being more sensitive, more refined, and the reason why it doesn't apply to behemoths is because that is used on the mizbeach. I mentioned today at the shiur something similar, not identical, that the issue of chelev, of the fat, is, so we're not allowed to have fats from the animals, whereas from a chaya we are allowed to. I suggested that that's because the chelev is put on the mizbeach by a korban, and therefore the chelev is sacred in a korban, therefore we're not allowed to eat the fat. A chaya will never come into the mizbeach, and therefore we are allowed to eat the chelev of the chaya. Right, and just to summarize that point, chelev adam, this is the two vital parts of life, the chayas and the gishmak. Dam is the chayas, and chelev is the gishmak. So those inyonim which we have, we should realize that they really belong on the mizbeach. They belong in the area of avodas Hashem. And we're now going to finish off the last paragraph of today's Rambam, which is the end of Sefer Kedusha. When we do the mitzvah of covering the blood of the bird or the chaya, lo yachase beragloi, don't kick it with your foot. Ela beyodoi, you should do so with your hand, or besakin, or with a knife, or bekli, or with another implement. I was there a couple of times at Kaporis, on Erev Yom Kippur, I could see how by the shechita of the kaparas, so the Rebbe did kaparas in his room, and then he brought the chicken out to where the sukkah is, and Reb Yishmoel Shem Kalmason was the shochet. He was there, ready, waiting, and he prepared a square of cardboard, and he had a pile of sawdust, and he made in the middle of the sawdust. He made like a recess, so it was like a pool in the middle of surrounded with sawdust, and he shechted the chicken, and the blood trickled into that middle area. Probably was sawdust at the bottom also, but made like. And then he plucked 4 feathers, and then he gave the Rebbe these 4 feathers. I think it was 4 feathers, and the Rebbe used them to brush, made the broch, and then he brushed the sawdust from the various sides to cover over the blood of the shechted chicken. Okay, so one doesn't do shchisi hadam with your feet. It's out of respect. And instead, you do it either with your hand or with a knife or another implement. Kaddish shelo yinhag boi minag bizoyin. Not to use to behave in a disgraceful way. Yiyu mitzvahs bezuyos olav. This would indicate that the mitzvahs are looked down, they're disdained by the person. And now, what's the mitzvah? She'ena koved la'atzmon shem mitzvahs. The koved is not here for the dust and not for the blood. The koved is elo lemisha tzivo behen baruch hu. Treating a mitzvah with respect is treating the commander of those mitzvahs with respect. And he finishes off, V'hitzilonu milamashish b'cheshech. And Hashem, blessed be He, has saved us from groping in the darkness. V'orach oisonu. And He's prepared for us neir, a lamp, l'yasher ha'ma'akashim, to straighten out the crookedness. Ve'er, and the mitzvahs are a light, l'hoiros nesivos yosher, to guide in paths of righteousness and on. Indeed, we have a posuk in Tehillim, which is the support of the Rambam's very poetic language. Neir l'ragli devorecho, your words are like a lamp to my feet. In other words, I should go in the right way. Ve'oil nesivosi, and they are a light for my path. And with this, the Rambam finishes off Sefer Kedusha. With this, I wish you all good night. Akutan Shabbos. You should hear Cyrus Tovos, Shois, Menachomos, Makshiach Tzidkenu, Basuras Hagula, V'Meher V'Yameinu Mamish.